Did she just say surrender? General Varnock scoffed, his tusks dripping with laughter. Across the war table, General Creel spat glowing green wine across the data screen, barely choking back another wheezing laugh. For more generals joined in with tail-slapping applause. Colonel Mara Kincaid didn't flinch. She stood with both hands calmly behind her back, tilted her head slightly, and uttered one word. Proceed. The laughter stopped like someone had slammed a steel hatch. That word wasn't part of a joke. That word was a command. They'd expected Earth to beg, to scramble for status, to send a puffed-up diplomat in a polished uniform to deliver apologies for the unauthorized mining outpost Earth had built along the edge of the Scorpion Belt. Instead, they got her. A human. A female. A colonel no one in the Galactic Council had ever heard of. Thin, calm, dressed in matte black armor with no visible weapons. To them, she looked like a secretary someone forgot to replace. To her, they looked like a room full of corpses that hadn't yet realized what time it was. General Varnock pushed his claws into the thick wood table and leaned forward. Let me understand this properly, Earthling. You come into the unified chamber. You interrupt a closed session war tribunal. You deliver what sounds like a peace offer. And now you whisper threats? You must be malfunctioning. She blinked slowly, then looked at the table's centerpiece, a projected 3D map of the Scorpion Belt. The glowing rings floated gently above the table's edge, displaying the tiny coordinates where Earth had planted unauthorized mining bots to harvest Helionite 9. The violation was real. The panic Earth's mining caused among the Council? Also real. Helionite 9 powered the biggest war engines in the galaxy, and the last thing the other empires wanted was for Earth to gain enough of it to crawl from the dirt and start aiming upwards. Mara spoke slowly. There's no malfunction. And I didn't say surrender. I said proceed. It's not a threat. It's the conclusion of a protocol already in motion. General Creel snarled, revealing bioluminescent fangs. Do not play games, Earthling. Your kind barely survived the Plasma Draft Treaty. We were gracious. We left you a moon. And now you show your teeth. Kincaid tilted her head to the other side, almost studying him like a mildly interesting pest. You left us a moon because you thought we couldn't weaponize it. You should have checked again this morning. Silence fell like an avalanche. Admiral Kaiser, the oldest and only one in the room who had seen the last interstellar extinction up close, slowly sat forward, claws steepled, expression unreadable. The others whispered curses under their breath. But Kaiser, he blinked once, then whispered, Spectre. The table froze. No one else spoke. Creel's tail twitched. Varnock looked confused. Kaiser's voice was barely audible. You triggered it? Kincaid didn't answer. She just tapped her left wrist with 2 fingers, then let her hand fall again. Somewhere far above the station's orbit, a non-registered Earth satellite began rotating. From the outside, it looked like a derelict solar collector. From the inside, it was waking up. General Karka grunted, trying to play tough. I demand to see credentials. A formal security badge. Where is your commanding officer? Kincaid walked to the edge of the war room, stopped beside a glowing shield panel, and placed her palm against the glass. The shield flickered for a millisecond, then displayed something not even the alien generals could deny. Clearance level Omega 13. Galactic Override Protocol Earth Black. Kaiser exhaled slowly, claws still steepled. She is the commanding officer. Of what? Creel snapped. Earth's daycares. Kaiser didn't smile. He stared at the flickering badge. Of the Ghost Division. Spectre. The failsafe command Earth swore didn't exist. I saw the documents during the Korth raids. I thought it was just smoke. Propaganda. A Black Ops bluff. He looked directly at her. Wasn't it? She didn't blink. That's what you should have kept believing. A single ping echoed through the chamber. A small orb floated through the ceiling shield and projected a new hollow image onto the table. A frozen moon. Inert. Harmless. Located in unclaimed space. Then, without transition, the image changed. The moon shuddered once and disappeared. Not exploded. Not vaporized. Just gone. Not a trace. Just empty vacuum and ripples in the radiation field. Creel lunged forward. That's illusion tech. You doctor that feed. Varnock reached for his chest rig and pulled out a neural port. He jacked into the raw Council satellite relay, demanded live data. The same image appeared. Blank space. Still no moon. Still no helionite core. Gone. Kaiser whispered again, eyes narrowing. Proceed wasn't a threat. It was a trigger. Kincaid finally sat. Calm. Centered. You can keep shouting. You can keep laughing. But that moon was the first and last warning. Spectre doesn't care who's laughing. It doesn't recognize jokes. It only follows one voice. Mine. And as of now, I'm the only one in this chamber with the ability to stop it. Stop what? Varnock growled. She smiled just slightly. The sequence. Sequence of what? She leaned back. You have about 20 minutes to read your own classified files. I suggest you use them well. The shield flickered again. Another orb floated in. This one showing 6 marked coordinates glowing in red across the galactic map. None of them were random. All of them were key military installations belonging to the Laughing Generals. The air in the room shifted. It wasn't fear yet, but it was close. Creel leaned in again, his voice breaking into a hiss. You think this makes you strong? Kincaid gave the smallest shrug. I don't need to be strong. I just need to be obeyed. Kaiser stood slowly. No weapons. No threats. He bowed slightly, an old ceremonial gesture. Not of surrender. Of acknowledgement. The others stared, confused. Kaiser spoke with reverence. I told them Earth was not to be provoked. They laughed. I didn't. You carry a burden that should never have been built. Mara didn't answer. Kaiser sat down again. No one else dared speak. Somewhere beyond the chamber walls, Spectre kept listening. Above the chamber, in a dead orbit over neutral space, Spectre's core rotated precisely 4 degrees. No sound accompanied the movement. No visible weapon array deployed. It did not beam warnings. It did not transmit demands. It simply activated a subroutine titled Fold Alpha 3 and began compiling its observational metrics in real time. The device had no artificial intelligence, no curiosity, no personality. It had only instructions, locked to a voice print and authorization code that had just been reawakened after 17 years of dormancy. On the surface of its outer shell, thermal waves shimmered faintly as its quantum lattice came online. In the war room, the tension didn't crack, it thickened. Varnock paced behind his chair now, claws twitching with the restless impulse of a beast caught between fury and disbelief. Creel's voice was quieter than before, no longer filled with thunder, but something colder. He asked, without sarcasm, what exactly Spectre was programmed to do. Mara didn't speak right away. She didn't rush to intimidate or gloat. Instead, she folded her hands and looked down at the table, almost as if calculating how much truth to reveal. Then she answered. It was built as a last resort deterrent. A Black Ops device never meant to be known, never officially built. Its primary function was threat neutralization through mass deletion. Not explosion, not occupation, not brute destruction. Spectre was designed to erase the signature of any artificial object or location marked hostile, from weapons platforms to entire moons, using a cascade of space-folding fields that bent localized space-time into itself, creating containment voids that would disappear into null space. It didn't need targeting lasers. It didn't need a crew. It simply needed a name and a voice. Hers. Creel whispered, why would Earth create something like that? Kincaid finally looked at him. Because we don't like second chances when we're dead. You've all underestimated Earth for centuries. Our wars looked primitive. Our politics were messy. But what none of you saw were the shadows. We learned our lessons early. We lost entire continents before we understood what real deterrence looked like. You built armadas. We built this. Not to conquer. To ensure no one ever made the mistake of thinking Earth couldn't end a war before it started. Varnock slammed his palm against the table. His voice had returned to its full volume. You threaten galactic peace over a border dispute. You show a magic trick, call it a weapon, and think we'll kneel? We've flattened planets for less. His words landed like stones, but his eyes flickered to Kaiser, who still hadn't spoken again. The old admiral's silence was beginning to speak louder than the others shouting. Mara didn't blink. She reached into a compartment in her suit and placed a small cube on the table. It clicked once, then projected another hologram. This one showed a slow replay of the vanished moon. As it shimmered and disappeared, the data feed scrolled down the side. Mass loss. Radiation signature collapse. Gravitational echo. It was real, and it wasn't done by a standard weapon. Creel leaned closer, squinting at the output. There's no thermal spike. No debris trail. Not even a light wave. Just gone. What is that? She said nothing. The data answered for her. One of the younger generals, Jorik, finally spoke. His voice was uncertain. Why are there 6 more targets highlighted? Are those warnings? Or is the sequence already live? She looked at him, and for a brief second, there was a softness in her eyes. You were the only one who didn't laugh when I walked in. That might have saved your system. Maybe. Jorik turned pale. Kaiser finally moved. He stood, walked slowly toward the front of the chamber, and turned his back to the table. His voice was quiet. During the Korth raids, the humans never deployed their full fleet. I always wondered why. We had evidence they had additional ships docked behind Luna's shadow. Now I realize they never needed ships. They just needed someone to listen. And when no one listened, they built something that doesn't need diplomacy. It just waits. Varnock growled again, but it was more out of desperation than authority now. He stepped forward, pointing a clawed finger at Mara. You bluff. Earth has no legal standing to deploy a weapon of that magnitude in neutral territory. You're violating Council war protocols. Her reply came without pause. Earth isn't in your war protocols. You never let us in. You wanted us small. You wanted us quiet. You laughed when we asked for inclusion. Now we're talking in a language you finally understand. Kaiser turned. Her voice print is active. That means Spectre is locked on her until death or override, which means any attempt to detain her will be interpreted as a threat by the system. The other generals froze. The implications sank in. If they tried to arrest her, even for questioning, Spectre would act autonomously. It wouldn't ask for clarification. Creel sat down finally. He didn't speak. Varnock did, but his voice was lower. If this is a negotiation tactic, it's the most reckless bluff I've seen. She didn't answer. Instead, she tapped the cube again. Another hologram flickered to life. This time, it showed real-time footage from outside the station, a far camera capturing something massive shifting behind the edge of a gas cloud. A structure. No engines. No signals. Just a presence. It was Spectre, and it was closer than they thought. Jorik whispered what no one else dared. What do you want? She finally smiled. Modestly. We want recognition. We want resource rights. We want Earth on the Council. And we want an end to the assumption that humans are lesser. We've bled too much in your shadows. We've buried too many while you played games over scraps. Now we're here. And we're done asking nicely. Kaiser looked around at his peers, then back at her. If we give you that, will you shut it down? She didn't smile this time. I never said it was on. The room fell into stillness. Creel broke it with a soft, bitter laugh. If it isn't on, then what was that moon? She leaned forward slightly. A test. One we passed. You failed. Outside the station, Spectre rotated another 4 degrees. Nothing visible. Nothing loud. But every sensor on every nearby vessel blinked a single line of unreadable code across their screens. One word. Listening. The war room was no longer a place of dominance, but of silence wearing the mask of order. The generals who once barked and mocked now sat in uneasy postures, their armor creaking with every twitch of restrained instinct. Each one of them was re-evaluating everything they thought they knew about Earth. What was once considered a dust-covered planet with aggressive politics and outdated weapons was now looking more like a wounded beast that had been learning in the shadows. One that had built something monstrous, something precise, something silent. Colonel Kincaid, still standing like a statue forged in fire, watched them calculate fear. Not panic, not yet. Just the early kind. The rational kind. The kind that whispered questions like what happens if we're wrong. 8 drones flitted into the room, carrying silent notifications from the outer sectors. Spectre had begun issuing electromagnetic pulses on specific frequencies, ancient Earth ones, no longer in use by any galactic entity. Morse code. Someone translated it. It simply read awaiting. The word appeared on every general's private console simultaneously. It wasn't asking for a target. It wasn't confirming a launch. It was just sitting in space, waiting for a voice it recognized. General Jorik looked to Kincaid and asked again, quieter this time, if the targets it had marked were symbolic or active. She answered with a question of her own. Do you want to find out? Jorik lowered his eyes. Creel didn't speak, but the side of his jaw tightened, as if he were grinding his fangs together. He had wanted Earth to be a training ground, a cautionary example for other lower-tier systems. That plan had just set itself on fire. Kaiser walked toward one of the control panels and placed his clawed hand on the access screen. His clearance overrode most council barriers, and soon the room was flooded with decades-old black files tagged with Earth's insignia. Video feeds, audio transcripts, tactical briefings. Most of them were incomplete, distorted, filled with strange gaps, as if entire years had been removed. But what remained was chilling. Spectre was first initiated after a failed diplomatic peace accord on Titan, where every human representative was assassinated during negotiations. The retaliation had never been seen. Until now, the Council believed Earth had simply withdrawn after the massacre. But deep in those files were references to test zones that no longer existed. Not bombed. Not destroyed. Gone. Creel finally stood, his claws tapping the table. Why wasn't this presented before? Why didn't Earth make this public if it was real? Kincaid answered plainly. Because fear built on rumor lasts longer than fear built on fact. You never cared about Earth's words. You only respect results. Today you saw one. Not the worst one, just enough. Varnock snarled, then jabbed a thick finger toward the holomap. So what now? You want a parade? A throne? Kincaid shook her head once. I want balance. I want peace. But I want it on our terms now. The doors to the chamber opened suddenly. Not with force. Not with drama. A small humanoid figure walked in, young, unarmed, and entirely human. He wore a sleek dark suit, no armor, no insignia, just a quiet confidence. The generals tensed until Kincaid gestured them down. This is Elias. He's not here to negotiate. He's here to watch. Elias nodded respectfully to the table. Varnock growled again. Another Earth spy? Kincaid raised a brow. Not a spy. A safeguard. If anything happens to me, Spectre defaults to him. And there's no shutdown command embedded in his clearance. If I die, it doesn't go quiet. It finishes what I started. The room practically hissed with a sudden pressurized silence. Kaiser stared at Elias for a long moment, as if seeing through years of deception. You built a system that can survive its own creator. That's not a deterrent. That's a legacy. Kincaid nodded. That's the point. Earth learned the cost of trusting other species too quickly. We're done being generous with our survival. Suddenly, alerts lit up along the outer rim of the chamber. One of the alien fleets had made a move. A Scorvian cruiser had locked weapons on a civilian mining vessel that bore Earth's flag. The act itself was not an attack, not yet, but it was a test. A challenge. They wanted to see if Spectre would react without Kincaid's direct order. Everyone turned to her. She remained still. Spectre, however, did not. The war room screens switched feeds. The Scorvian cruiser's view began glitching, the stars blinking in and out. A second later, its visual systems blacked out. Then came the telemetry loss. Then the sound, if it could be called that, a strange inverted silence that made no noise but still unsettled the spine. When the image returned, the cruiser was gone. Not burning. Not floating. just absent. The mining vessel was untouched, continuing along its course. Kaiser took a single step forward. That wasn't your command. Kincaid didn't look surprised. Spectre interpreted intent. They aimed weapons at a peaceful ship flying Earth's banner. That was enough. It does not ask permission to defend Earth's name. You build a god, Jorik muttered, eyes still wide. Kincaid's voice was level. No, we built a reminder. You don't get to laugh at Earth anymore. You don't get to judge our uniforms, mock our species, ignore our warnings. You don't get to see a female officer and assume weakness. You get one word. Proceed. And that's all you'll get. There were no more outbursts. No more accusations. A quiet understanding settled across the table. The generals looked at each other not as allies anymore, but as targets in waiting. The leverage had shifted. Not just to Earth, but to the woman they'd dismissed upon entry. She hadn't raised her voice once. She hadn't even stood when Spectre erased a warship. Yet everyone knew she now held more power in that room than all 7 alien empires combined. Kaiser finally nodded once. His voice held no sarcasm, no fear, only a grave sort of respect. Then you are not a negotiator. You are the quiet knife. Kincaid nodded back, then turned to Elias and gave the faintest smile. Not quite. The knife waits in the sheath. But now they know it's sharp. The outer space beyond the council station rippled with tension no less real than the silence inside. Word had already spread. Spectre was no longer rumor. It was no longer Earth's dirty secret. It was now the single most terrifying variable in every war table equation. Within hours, entire command networks across 3 sectors had restructured their fleet formations. Satellite clusters pivoted away from Earth zone. Automated translation drones began sending requests for updated diplomatic channels. But inside the war room, where the mood still hovered between dread and disbelief, the generals remained seated, not one of them daring to call recess. No one wanted to be the first to leave while Spectre was still watching. Jorik sat nearest to the hologram console, scanning for signs of bluff. He searched encryption trails, thermal anomalies, weapon signatures, anything that might suggest Spectre was just high-level sleight of hand. But the data didn't lie. The void events, the vanishing moon, the cruiser, were not illusions. There were no detectable explosions, no residual particles. It was as if those objects had simply been erased from space, quietly folded into non-existence. It violated every military protocol Jorik had ever trained under. Even his race's most ancient scrolls spoke of destruction in terms of fire, war, and ash. But this wasn't war. It was subtraction. Kaiser stood again, moving to the edge of the projection zone, staring out into the simulation feed where Spectre drifted. It looked too simple. A dull black sphere, slightly hexagonal, almost unremarkable. No glowing core. No moving parts. Just the kind of object you'd mistake for debris until it started deleting your fleet. He turned to Kincaid with a slow breath and asked what exactly it was waiting for. Her answer was immediate. Mistakes. She didn't say it with malice, but with the tone of someone who'd already seen too many. Across the room, Varnock finally cracked. His voice didn't rise in anger this time. It rose in fatigue. He demanded to know why the council hadn't been told earlier. If Spectre had existed for years, why keep it hidden until now? What kind of game was Earth playing? Kincaid stepped forward. We were ignored for a century. Our warnings, our requests, our peace offers, all mocked. You gave us observer status and no vote. You let our colonies be taxed but not defended. You laughed at our fleets, called our engineers primitive. So we stopped talking. We built something to fill the silence you left us in. And now we're here. Creel whispered something to himself, a guttural curse in his native tongue, before spitting onto the floor. His tail lashed once behind his chair before he pointed directly at Elias. And what's his role in this theater? Just another button waiting to be pressed. Elias didn't respond. He merely stood still, posture perfectly balanced, gaze calm and unwavering. It wasn't a soldier's stance. It was worse. It was the stance of someone who didn't need to prove anything. Kincaid answered instead. He's the backup operator. But Spectre doesn't need a pilot. It just needs confirmation. If I die, the system assumes my final action was justified. And it continues. Kaiser shook his head. That's madness. Kincaid met his gaze. That's insurance. We built it in the shape of your arrogance. She moved toward the console again and brought up a rotating model of the galaxy. 6 red points still blinked across the map. The pre-designated coordinates Spectre had been primed to erase. Each one represented a strategic hub from one of the general's empires. Fuel depots, war factories, military archives. The kind of places whose disappearance would be a slow death rather than an immediate one. Jorik leaned forward. So these targets, can they be removed? Kincaid looked at him as if the question amused her. They were never uploaded in the way you understand. Spectre isn't selecting them. I did. And I never gave it a delete list. I gave it criteria. If a vessel, station, or satellite fits those parameters, it gets marked. And if it escalates threat level by engaging, scanning, or signaling against Earth vessels, then yes, it's gone. Creel slammed his fist against the table. You've rigged the whole galaxy with invisible traps. Kincaid nodded. No, we made sure Earth never has to fight a war again. One of the holograms changed without warning. It showed a different fleet this time. Not a Scorvian vessel, not an Imperial patrol. It was a neutral trade convoy flagged under the Tarnari Union. 5 ships, armed but non-hostile, accidentally pinging an Earth drone for proximity clearance. Spectre didn't move, didn't blink. The room watched for a full minute. Nothing happened. Kaiser narrowed his eyes. It's selective. Kincaid nodded. Spectre was designed with moral parameters. It doesn't just react. It evaluates. It knows the difference between a probe and an attack, between a mistake and a message. That was when the true shift occurred. The generals didn't speak for a moment. They simply looked at each other, and for the first time, not one of them doubted that Earth had built something they couldn't counter. Not just in power, but in thought. A weapon that could reason. A device that needed no war to win. Varnock finally sat down, breathing heavy. I was taught humans were unpredictable. Turns out we were just blind. Kincaid reached for the command cube and shut down the projections. The lights in the room dimmed slightly. Then she turned to each general and made her final move. I'm not here to conquer. I'm here to balance. Earth demands a council seat, equal vote, border recognition, resource parity, and full access to trade routes. You'll agree to this today, or Spectre stays exactly where it is, and you explain to your worlds tomorrow why your skies can't be trusted anymore. Kaiser looked around the room. Not one voice rose in protest. Not Creel, not Varnock, not even the junior aides behind them. Kincaid's eyes held no anger, no triumph, only certainty. The kind that came from walking into a room full of enemies and knowing you only needed one word to walk out alive. This time, she didn't even have to say it. She turned away from the table. The door opened behind her. Elias followed silently. No one stopped them. The doors to the war chamber sealed quietly behind her, not with triumph, not with applause, but with the weight of a decision no one dared to challenge. Colonel Mara Kincaid walked through the silent corridor with Elias by her side, her steps echoing like the ticking of a clock that had just been reset. They did not speak as they passed the polished walls, lined with flags of 100 systems that had once looked down on Earth. Every guard they passed stood a little straighter now, not out of formality, but because something in the air had shifted. The kind of shift no decree could reverse. The kind that settled into every unspoken rule. Kincaid didn't walk like someone who had won. She walked like someone who had made sure they wouldn't lose again. Back on Earth, the Council's feed delay was only a few minutes, but it didn't matter. The moment the news was confirmed, every news network, encrypted feed, and military forum exploded with the same headline. Earth gains full Council seat. No war. No declaration. No battle. Just a seat. Just like that. But the subtext spoke louder. The galaxy didn't give it. They were given no choice. The silent weapon had done what no war had managed in centuries. It rewrote Earth's future in the space of an hour. Inside an underground command bunker beneath Alaska's icy surface, a group of analysts monitored Spectre's telemetry. The object had returned to its idle pattern, drifting just outside planetary orbit like a forgotten satellite. One of the younger analysts asked the room what they should do now. The reply came from the oldest technician on the floor. "We do nothing. That's the point. Spectre doesn't win wars. It prevents them. As long as it's quiet, we've already won." Meanwhile, on the far edge of the Molucc system, General Varnock stood aboard his flagship, watching the stars in cold silence. His officers didn't speak unless spoken to now. The memory of that vanished cruiser lingered in their minds like a wound they couldn't name. Varnock gritted his fangs, staring at the spot where the moon had once been before Spectre erased it. The more he thought about it, the more he understood that Earth hadn't created a superweapon. They had created belief, not in Earth's strength, but in the price of disrespect. He didn't trust humans. He probably never would. But he would never laugh at one again. Back on the Galactic Core, council members debated behind closed doors, some demanding Earth be restricted again, others whispering they should reach out in secret for alliances. But no one dared to oppose the vote publicly. Earth's seat was now cemented in the law books. Their representatives would now have equal voice. But more importantly, every member knew what else stood behind that voice. Spectre had no ambassador, no translator, no fail-safe. It wasn't political. It was personal. And now, everyone who dared cross Earth would remember the woman who only said one word. Colonel Kincaid returned to Earth without ceremony. There were no parades, no medals, no public announcement. She didn't want them. The work wasn't done. When she arrived back at the base, she went straight to the lowest level of a classified installation and keyed her personal biometric code into a door most didn't know existed. Inside was a single chair, a console, and a black monitor. The room was empty except for a single blinking light. Elias entered behind her, looking more thoughtful than usual. He asked if she believed Spectre would ever be used again. She sat down slowly and replied without looking at him, "I hope not. That wasn't a weapon out there. That was a reminder of how far we were pushed before we pushed back." He nodded, but after a moment asked the question that had been building in him since the chamber meeting. Was Spectre real? She finally turned and looked at him. "That depends on what you mean. Does it exist? Yes. Can it do what they think? No. At least, not all of it. The cruiser? That wasn't Spectre. That was a bait drone armed with temporal scramblers and illusion shells. We never fired a real shot. The moon was a decoy full of obsolete tech, hollowed and rigged to collapse on cue. The rest? Holograms. Timing. Psychological warfare. No one outside Earth knows that. And now they never will." Elias blinked. "So we lied?" Kincaid stood, walked to the console, and pressed her palm flat against it. The light stopped blinking. "We gave them what they gave us. Doubt. And then fear. What matters isn't whether Spectre works. It's that they believe it does. And that belief protects Earth better than any fleet ever could." He stared at her as the realization sank in. There was no doomsday machine, just an orchestrated illusion, so complete that even the galaxy's most paranoid leaders had bought it. But he still had one more question. What if someone calls the bluff? She looked at him again, but this time her eyes weren't tired. They were ready. Then we build it for real. The silence between them wasn't heavy. It was mutual, resolved. She walked past him, up the stairs toward the surface. Elias stood for a moment longer, then followed. Days later, in the depths of the Tarnari archives, an ancient species reviewed the footage again. A secret council of historians and war tacticians tried to analyze the footage frame by frame. They tried to decode Spectre's origin, break down its structure, predict its next move. But none of their simulations made sense. The physics were wrong. The timelines didn't match. It was as if Spectre operated on rules they didn't understand. And that was the genius of it. Because when fear cannot be measured, it cannot be countered. From that day on, Spectre was more than a myth. It was an unprovable weapon. A ghost at the edge of every fleet commander's strategy. A shadow in the mind of every admiral. And at the center of it, forever etched into the galactic psyche, was the calm voice of the woman they had all once laughed at. A woman who didn't yell, didn't threaten, didn't need to. She had only looked at them with all their arrogance and said one word: proceed.